I am honored to call Rabbi Pesner a friend. We got to know each other when I served on the board of the URJ, and I admired his work and his dedication to civil rights and social justice for everyone. And the everyone to me is the important. As you said earlier, and you probably say again or something similar, that you're not doing tikkun olam, you're not repairing the world if you only repair it for the Jews. That isn't repairing the world if you only repair it for our tribe. No, you have to repair the whole world. You have to heal all the brokenness. So that's Rabbi Pesner in a nutshell. I think you don't need to say anything else. But Rabbi Pesner serves as the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and senior vice president of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism. He is one of the most influential rabbis I have ever met, and he builds bridges. He fights injustice everywhere that he can, and more importantly, he organizes Jewish communities to do that too. So he's an organizer, not just a leader. But you're a leader even if no one's following you. People follow him, and I hope that tonight you will all see why. So Rabbi Pesner has expanded, access to healthcare, voting rights, equality, among many, many other things. He also has a new book out, which you can get tonight and get signed. And I hope that if you don't have it already, you will please choose to do so. And I'm very excited to welcome Rabbi Pesner.
Wow, I am so honored to be introduced by Alan and Carol. I love you. I see you. We miss you at the URJ. And it's just such an honor to invoke the name of your parents and to know that in some heavenly station, they're probably with my father and, my grandparents all heckling. So, or critiquing or whatever they're doing. Wow. Hi, Jonah. I'm seeing myself on the live stream. I'm going to try and look at all of you and not myself. I've been told to stay in this area because there are folks welcome if you're live streaming. There are going to be times, folks, on the live stream, all of a sudden it seems like I've left. I haven't left you. I'm just with them because y'all are here in person and I love you and I might want to come close to you. So you'll forgive me. But so was that good practice, folks? I will always come back to you because I see you. Okay. Thank you to the Temple Chai community for hosting once again. Really appreciate you, Rabbi Siegel, and the distinguished clergy and leadership that's here. Rav Shmuley, I said it before, I'll say it again. I love you. We're soul brothers in this work, and I love Valley Beit Midrash and everything that you do, and really moving to hear the stories. I just want to also say what an honor to follow Nona and Alan and Amy. What a wonderful thing to actually speak after the people doing the work. Normally I give my spiel and then I do a call to action and I say, who's with me? They're like, oh, well, you're very entertaining, but I'm busy. And I love, Alan, you called me an organizer because one of the reasons I became a rabbi organizer was I was tired of giving the really great sermon and then no one's showing up. They renew my contract, but they didn't come do the thing I asked them to do. And I was like, I'm not in this to give charismatic sermons. I'm in this to change the world. So who's with me? So you all are the actual people doing the work. And so thank you for doing it. And I promise I will end with a call to action tonight. I don't know if you noticed, but if we talk about democracy and we talk about social justice, Arizona has a role to play. There's a lot happening in the next 5-6 weeks, and it isn't just high holidays, and it isn't just the October 7th commemoration. So we are going to need you, and I promise to do the call to action. I want to recognize one other person who's not yet been recognized tonight. There is a president in our midst. It is an honor that the North American president of the North American board of the Federation of Temple Youth, NIFTY, is here tonight, Benji Rosenblum. We could not have a better leader at a moment in Jewish history when there's so much happening and so much need to build a robust team-led youth movement. And Benji, you are doing that. My mentor, Marshall Gams at the Harvard Kennedy School, used to famously say, every successful social movement in history was led by idealistic young people. If we don't have young people leading us, we will not transform the world. So Benji, thank you for organizing thousands and thousands of Jewish teens to follow you and to be with us. So Here, I promise I'm still here. Hopefully you're listening. This will be not a visual thing. It'll be an oral thing. We all good? Okay, I want to be, I need to connect. I need to, I experience God in relationships. So let me say just a word of autobiography that is not in the official bio that Alan read, but a little bit. And it's really in the spirit of how do we honor our parents, the people who came before us, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for my father, a blessed memory. And it will help you when I tell the story of his life and its influence on me, why I am the kind of rabbi I am, and why I do the work I do, and why I invite you all into this work, which many of you are already doing. I grew up in Lower Manhattan, and in the 1970s, I was born in 68, so kind of, New York City at a certain moment. Any former New Yorkers here? Any recovering New Yorkers? Wonderful. I think you may enjoy this story. So we grew up in Lower Manhattan, and my dad was the president of our little Reform Jewish congregation, the Village Temple. And my mom was on the board, and my brother started the youth group, and it was the kind of community, kind of people knew each other. The way that you just applauded for Benji was a little bit like the way I felt about my own congregation of my youth. And my rabbi used to famously say that the Pesner family was the first family to host me for Shabbat dinner when I came to this community. And that would fill me with pride, right? And so it was kind of like this community that loomed large. And you can imagine, Greenwich Village in the 70s was kind of swirling with all kinds of stuff. The little temple 2 blocks from my apartment was like a home away from home. Tragedy struck when I was entering high school. My father died very suddenly from a heart attack. And 2 things happened. One is the temple, the rabbi, the Hebrew school teachers, the sisterhood ladies surrounded my brother, my mother, and me with love and with comfort. I was mentored and guided by youth group advisors who were students at the Hebrew Union College. So young rabbis who were playing guitar and bringing me to Jewish summer camp and bringing me to Nifty in Israel, where I said Kaddish for my dad the first year of his yard site and met my wife, Dana, who I thankfully met in youth group. And I became a rabbi in part. Okay, use them all together. Don't log off, people. Stay with us. Oh, much better. Hi, you're back. I missed you. They want to know how the story ends. Thank you, Rabbi. See, rabbis and cantors are really just, tech people, roadies. So I became a rabbi largely because of the way that these dynamic rabbis and the Jewish community around them cared for and modeled the beloved community, a community in which I knew I was seen and held and loved. And I walk in the footsteps of those rabbis who came before me. But that's only part of the story. My mother became a single working mother. We lived in affordable housing. And I left the private school system that I had been in because we couldn't afford it. And I went to the best public school in New York City. Now be careful. Wrong answer. That's the second best school in New York City, Stuyvesant High School. What is actually the best high school in New York City? The Bronx High School of Science for the win. Yes. Now, this is very important because growing up on 10th Street, if I got to Stuyvesant, it would have been like a 10-minute walk. I would have stayed in my wonderful little bubble, the insular little thing where I was loved and seen. But instead, God had better plans for me. I didn't get into Stuyvesant, to be honest. My older brother did. New York City public schools, magnets, it's a whole thing. Anyway, that's for the dessert. But I do actually like to say that God put me on the number 4 train for a reason. Because every day, the shrimpy little white Jewish kid would get on the number 4 train at 14th Street at Union Square and ride it through, in the early 1980s, some of the richest neighborhoods in Western civilization and the poorest neighborhoods in Western civilization. Midtown, all the corporate executives, Upper East Side, all the rich white people. At 86th Street, all the white people got off. And it was Black and brown communities, Harlem, and then the South Bronx. Above ground train through neighborhoods that had literally been abandoned. For Apache the Bronx, law enforcement just kind of drew a circle around it and kind of said, with all the unhoused folks, all the people who are addicted, who got criminalized for their addiction, all the people suffering from incredible poverty, the racialized, radical inequality that I witnessed every day. This was a neighborhood with burnt out tracts and tracts of abandoned buildings and people swatting and with drug deals and streetwalkers and the kind of suffering that was unimaginable. And I would look out into the neighborhoods and imagine and ask, who would live in these neighborhoods? And then a kid would get on the train and be sitting next to me in math class. It was not the little Jewish bubble that I had been nurtured for and cared about. It was very agitational for 4 years during some of the most tumultuous. You remember the 1980s in New York City? It was a thing. And what was agitational for me as a young person was the disconnect between the incredible sermons of my rabbis, who constantly said, "Litaken olam b'malchut Shaddai," to repair the world in the vision of what God intended the world to be, to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God, to love the stranger, to be for the widow and the orphan, to open our hand to the poor, to hear that sermon again and again, and then to witness the radical poverty of the South Bronx, and to ask the question, where are we? Where are we? There was a remember homelessness happened overnight in the early 1980s? I was the youth group president. Were you the youth group president before you were? No, okay. Well, all right, but you're the nifty president, so even better. We upgraded. I was youth group president at the time, so I got to go to board meetings. This is like punishment for teens. Congratulations, you're the youth group president. Now you get to go to board meetings. So I would sit there doing homework, not paying much attention until somebody asked the question, what shall we do about the unhoused person who's sleeping in the vestibule of the temple? Oh, well, this is interesting. And the first answer was, well, why don't we open our doors and live out our tradition and create a shelter and house the person sleeping here? And then a debate ensued. And I actually heard someone say the words, do we really want those people here? I thought, no, hold on. Now, wait a second. This community that saved my spiritual life, that loved me and my mother and my brother at this incredible moment of vulnerability, we can only stay in that community because of affordable housing and public education. But those people are not welcome here. That was the beginning of my journey to be a rabbi who was not just going to be a Jewish continuity rabbi, who was not just going to lift up and raise up a generation of Jewish young people, but who would challenge my Jewish community to not just leave the Torah and the Ark, but to take it out into the streets and having it live and breathe. By the way, as a coda to the story, when I was a congregational rabbi learning how to organize communities into justice, an incredible Lutheran minister who had pastored in the South Bronx challenged me. He said, Rabbi, you don't have enough imagination. You don't understand what's possible. I said, well, what do you want me to do, Reverend Heinemeier? I said, I want you to organize a trip to go back to the South Bronx. I was like, Pastor Heinemeier, I am not going back to the South Bronx. That was a time and a place. He said, no, you need to see what's possible. And not only do I want you to come, I want you to bring the most powerful rabbis in Boston, which is where I was rabbiing. And I want you to bring the top 2 donors to your synagogue. And I want you to bring the head of your Jewish Federation and your JCRC. You say, are you crazy? You want me to put my whole thing on the line? He convinced me to do it. And we all went on a trip and we saw Nehemiah homes, tens of thousands of units of owner-occupied housing that had transformed the South Bronx into a vibrant, dynamic neighborhood with people who in the community that lived in the community built the homes with freshly planted gardens and now growing businesses and kids playing safely in the streets, all that had been organized by the churches with one synagogue to put pressure on the mayor to give this religious community, South Bronx churches, the land, worked with developers to develop the land themselves, put themselves through financial literacy to hold themselves accountable, to become mortgage holders, worked with Wall Street to get favorable mortgages and transformed the South Bronx. This is a real story. You Google it, Nehemiah Homes, South Bronx. And I turned to Reverend Heinemeier. I said, how did you do this? And he said, I didn't do this. We did this. The faith community organized and put political pressure and did the hard work. And I said, you are the kind of rabbi I need to be. That's why I have devoted my life to be a rabbi who teaches Torah and leads worship and challenges my people to do the work together that the Torah calls us to do. And so it's my greatest honor that when my predecessor, who spoke to you last year, the amazing, wonderful Rabbi David Saperstein, when he was appointed by President Obama to be ambassador at large for international religious freedom, to follow in his footsteps. I had spent the 10 years before that working with David doing grassroots community organizing. And that's why I had been into Arizona before. I was helping congregations like Temple High and the other congregations figured out how to build the multi-faith interracial partnerships to do justice on a local level. And so it was an incredible honor to come and follow in David's footsteps. And I have now learned a lot in the decade that's been 10 years since I've been in the role, leading the Religious Action Center Reform Judaism, about the landscape of democracy and racism and anti-Semitism and social justice in America. So tonight I want to think with you a little bit about where we've been and where we're headed. Are you with me? Okay, that was all just the warm-up. Take a deep breath, everybody. We good? Okay, so I told you my origin story. I want to make sure you know our origin story. Before I do, our origin story, of course, is in the Torah, and I'll reference Torah in a minute. I mean our more modern origin story of the Religious Action Center, which is our Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. How many of you know about the founding of our RAC? How many of you have no idea? How many of you have heard the name Kivi Kaplan? All right, this is a good story. I got one hand? Did I get one hand? All right, so it's a good story, right? I'm going to tell it. The Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which is the social justice hub, not just for the Reform Jewish movement, but because we are one broad, expansive Jewish community, for many, many, many Jewish communities that care about Jewish social justice in Washington and across North America, in the United States particularly. Kivi Kaplan was a great Jewish philanthropist, like many of our Jewish families who was a family of immigrants, came to this country with nothing, escaping the pogroms and the anti-Semitism of Europe, came to this country, settled in Boston. Kivi was fabulously successful as a leather tanner or a leather merchant. He built a huge leather business, became very rich, and of course then became very philanthropic. And he was on the board of Allen. You follow in great footsteps. Kivi Kaplan was on the board of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the URJ. Ginny, right? So you follow in Kivi Kaplan's footsteps. He was a member of Temple Israel of Boston, and he was very generous to the synagogue. But his formative experience that informed his philanthropy was when he and his wife, Emily, went on their honeymoon to Florida. What happened? He and Emily were driving around, being driven around by a taxi driver in South Florida of a different era. And everywhere they went, they see the same sign over and over again. No Jews, no dogs. No Jews, no dogs. They were shocked. They turned to the black taxi driver who had been driving them from place to place and said, "What is this? Like, is this common down here?" And the driver looked at them and said, "They don't even bother with us. They don't even bother with us." That was the formative experience that informed Kivi Kaplan's philanthropy. He went back home and joined the NAACP. He became extremely active in the NAA, rose to so much prominence, he became the president and was the last white Jewish president of the NAACP, which in its founding, in response to the lynchings of Jim Crow, was founded by mostly Black Christians and white Jews. And I want to interrupt myself just for a moment because it plays into this nostalgia of this false binary of white Jews and Black Christians. I invoke the name of Charles McDew. How many of you have heard of Charles McDew? He was one of the directors of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He followed a guy named Marion Barry. You've heard of him, I bet. And he was followed by a guy I know you've heard of, John Lewis. But nobody knows Chuck McDew. He was Jewish and Black. So we get sucked into this kind of false binary. We see Heschel over here and King over there, and we think. So I just want to interrupt that narrative to remind us there are Black Jews, Latino Jews, Asian Jews, Jews of all hues, and there were then and there are now. But be that as it may, the majority on the NAACP were white Jews and Black Christians working together. And Kaplan was adamant in understanding what King taught, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that if you target the Jewish community, you target the Black community. If you target the Black community, you target the gay community. If you target the gay community, you target the immigrant community, and. And so he bought an embassy-sized building in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., and gave it to us, the Reform Jewish movement, of which he was a trustee. 5 stories, magnificent building. But he said, I have one condition for my gift. You have to use it as a hub for the civil rights movement. That's Jim Crow, late 50s. There is no office of civil rights. King did not have an office. He had a church in Georgia. So Rabbi Dick Hirsch, my second predecessor before Rabbi Saperstein, was called to Washington to be the founding director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And his first act of leadership in taking over the RAC was to call his dear friend, a young, dynamic pastor, and say, Martin, good news. You now have an office in Washington. The RAC invited in the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights, which, by the way, I'm on the board. You didn't read the formal bio, which is fine. I sit on the board of the NAACP. I sit on the board of the Leadership Conference, not because of anything I earned. I work hard, but because of the historic role that we have played in those 2 most important civil rights organizations in American history. So the Leadership Conference was housed at the Religious Action Center, which is why, and King would meet in our offices, which is why the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were drafted in our conference room. How many of you knew that? It's amazing. The 2 most important pieces of civil rights legislation in American history were written in the conference room of a Jewish institution. That's real. Now, I want to lift up, because the theme tonight is democracy. Why was it that Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner gave their lives for voting rights in Mississippi summer? Why was it that the first thing that King and Heschel and Dick Hirsch and the luminaries of the Leadership Conference and the NAA fought for was voting rights? Because they understood the Torah that I repeat over and over again. Our safety as Jews, our safety as any minority in this country, is in our solidarity with one another. The collective power we bring and the opportunity to be with one another and keep each other safe, and the redemption of this country, despite 400 years built on the theft of native lands, if we're being honest, and the enslavement of African people, followed by Jim Crow and racialized segregation. The redemption of that might happen through democracy. Democracy, which in our country has been imperfect. I'm looking around this room. Many people in this room at different moments in history would not have had the right to vote. If you go far back enough, most of us wouldn't, right? They understood that to actually operationalize God's vision for a world in which, as I taught earlier, we're all descended from that first human. The same God who used yellow clay and white sand and red soil and black loam. This is why Rabbi Hirsch invoked those words in Selma. John Lewis had his head bashed in Selma, marching for what? Voting rights, democracy. Because if we lived in a country where every voice was heard, because every vote actually gets counted, then the country would be a reflection of our shared values, our shared concerns, and the policies and laws would reflect the will of the people. Do you hear what I'm saying? This is why democracy matters so deeply. By the way, parenthetical side note, I have to issue, this is not what I typically before October 7th would say at this point in this talk, but I'm going to say it. Rabbi Dick Hirsch, who made history as the rabbi who marched in Selma and founded the Religious Action Center and the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act. Several years later, the reason why Rabbi Saperstein moved into the position and had a job was that Rabbi Hirsch made Aliyah to Israel. He founded the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, and he founded the IRAC, the Israel Religious Action Center, which fights for human rights and dignity and inclusion and against racism for all people in the land of Israel, including Palestinian citizens of Israel. Because Dick Hirsch understood, if you're for democracy in the United States as a Jew, you have to be for democracy in Israel as a Jew. If you are for democracy in Tucson or in Phoenix, then you have to be for democracy in Israel. And if you're for the human rights of the people in your neighborhood, you have to be for the human rights of all the people in your neighborhood. Dick Hirsch called Zionism a social justice ideology. He understood the Zionism not of knee-jerk defense Jews need a safe place at all costs, and that's why we have a land. He understood the Zionism that was the Zionism of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with King, of Martin Buber, and of Echad Ha'am. And if you don't know who Echad Ha'am is, later Google him. Because Echad Ha'am Zionism, which is not a Zionism we see much right now in the government of Israel, is a liberatory Zionism that said if our text is true, if what Isaiah said that God wants for us is to be an or lagoyim, a light unto what? The nations, all the nations. Then Israel should exist to liberate the Jewish people, to live freely in our ancestral lands, and be a catalyst for all people to live freely in all lands, including the Palestinian people in their lands. Right now in the post-October 7th world, it is so hard. We feel so squeezed. There is this binary where you're either for Jewish defense or you're for ending what's happening in Gaza. We live as Jews in the land of multiple truths and of radical empathy. We are the people who are reminded that one time in Torah it says, love your fellow, your neighbor, the person proximate to you as you love yourself. Love your fellow Jew as you love yourself. But 36 times, 36 ways, it says, love the stranger, the other, the person who is not of you, as you love yourself. Maybe because it's 36 times harder, maybe because it's 36 times more important, but it means that at this moment, we Jews hold empathy. We invoke the hostages and their families because we have empathy and we love. We invoke my goddaughter, who is right now in Iron Dome, protecting Israel's north from Hezbollah, and the empathy of all of our Israeli family who are at risk. And every baby in Gaza is our baby. Every child in the West Bank is our child. And every innocent civilian in Lebanon is our fellow human, created in the same ancestral line as ours. That's what it is to have empathy. Dick Hirsch, his memory for a blessing, he died a year and a half ago. He did not live to experience what we're going through at this moment, is to lean into the multiracial interfaith movement of solidarity for democracy in the United States, in which every voice will be heard when every voice is counted, and to be for an inclusive democracy in Israel, in which Israelis and Jews can thrive, and which Palestinians can realize their Palestinian national aspirations. Right now, it's very hard to see that. It feels very, very distant, I know. But to be a Jew is also to have hope. My teacher, Professor David Arno, who's the seminal professor, a seminal researcher on hope in the Jewish tradition, would argue the one thing that has guided us through 5,000 years, despite everything, is always having hope. We have to keep our image of what's possible and the world we imagine, because if we lose hope, then all is lost. So I insert that parenthetical sign. Let me now rewind the tape. I told our origin story, but the origin story of Iraq and our concern about democracy in this era. But let's remember, this vision for the world as it could be in the face of incredible oppression and anti-Semitism and bigotry wasn't born in the civil rights movement. Rabbi Dick Hirsch didn't make it up because of a political coalition he was in. He found it in our source. So I just want to invoke a few other names of our tradition to keep us all grounded in our spirituality and in our text and tradition. Everybody say Shifra.
Shifra.
Everybody say Pua. Okay, so I know I have some fans here. Who is Shifra?
The two midwives.
The two midwives, and they did what they're supposed to do, right? Who did they midwife? Well, before all the Hebrew babies,
right,
in the face of a genocidal decree, right? Remember the story. Pharaoh didn't just enslave our ancestors, he tried to commit genocide against our ancestors. And he said to the midwives, cast every Hebrew boy who's born into the sea so that they'll die. It's an awful and violent text. But Shifra and Pua did something radical. They resisted. Like, we think things are hard right now. Imagine being Shifra and Pua. Now, also, I want to, any healthcare workers here? Okay. I'm imagining that midwives back in ancient Egypt were not the most powerful voting bloc. I'm thinking Pharaoh had a lot of power. I'm thinking Pharaoh had all the power. And I'm thinking maybe if you were aristocracy, you could talk back to Pharaoh. But if you're a couple of women who do midwifery, you'd be executed on the spot. But these two women go to Pharaoh and say, you know, the Hebrews, these women, they're so fast. The babies are born and gone and we don't have time. And you know what Pharaoh does? He says, oh, okay. Then he goes around them. By the way, he goes directly to his people and he does a demagogic thing and he says, these people, they're coming numerous. Let's all deal wisely with them. And his people, the Egyptians, say, yeah, we hate these Hebrews. He others the Hebrews. We see this now in modernity, do we not? When demagogues other populations in order to rile up their own people. Just saying, it's a thing that happens. So what is the story of Shifra and Puah telling us? First of all, number one, it teaches us that resistance is always possible. What would have happened if the whole Egyptian society said no? The whole of human history would be different. Why do you think it was Shifra and Puah? Why just be a hero story of Shifra who resisted Pharaoh? Why does Puah have to be the story? By the way, Shifra's I know some Shifras. I don't need Puahs. Kind of too bad. We should bring back the name Puah. Anyway, why were there two of them? What do you think? Strength in numbers. They organized. They came together. They created the first SEIU chapter of midwifery in human history. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. Now, here's the other thing that's radical about this text. I love it when you said, I think, the midwives for everybody, and somebody else just said that, I think you said the midwives. The text actually says the Hebrew midwives. But Rashi, who has an agenda, you know Rashi, the famous commentator? Rashi says, were they the Hebrew midwives, or were they the midwives to the Hebrews? What would it mean if they were the midwives to the Hebrews?
They were exclusively the midwives for people.
Meaning they were themselves Egyptians. It is a statement of radical empathy, the possibility that it wasn't even just that they were resisting Pharaoh out of their narrow Jewish peoplehoodness. They were resisting Pharaoh out of their particularity as humans and concerned about all these babies. After all, think about it now, the drama of the text. What's a midwife's job? To birth life or to enable life, to be the midwife of life. Who is the ultimate arbiter of life and death? God. Only God gets to give life and take it away. Pharaoh has abdicated God's self, the ultimate act of tyranny, authoritarianism, and oppression. And the midwives have this universal ideal. Every human from the first creation, every baby is a child of God, and they bring life to teach us this universal message. By the way, it isn't just about Shifra and Puah. Who else resists this decree? Well, before we get to the princess, we'll get to her. Miriam and Yocheved, two more women. They come together and they don't want little baby Moses to die, so they conspire. By the way, the word conspiracy is really, it's a challenging word, so many conspiracy theories. But conspire is actually a beautiful word. It means breathe together. We breathe together, right? It's important. Breath is life. God breathed life into that first human. And so imagine when we breathe together, we are bringing life together. So they conspire, right? They rescue this baby. And now let's talk about the princess. Who rescues that baby? Right? The princess who is the daughter of that Pharaoh. I mean, the story is like Rav Shmuley alarm bells going, pay attention here. This matters. Dafka, if Pharaoh's own daughter could resist this thing with two of the lowest wage workers, along with two Hebrews, all of whom are women, just saying, we know redemption is possible when people of faith gather and organize. And that's what they are. They're people of faith. They believe in a higher power than Pharaoh the bigot. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
That's our collective origin story. Okay, let's get to, not today, but 2015. We still are good? People good? Rav Shmuley, do I have another few minutes or what? All right, I'm on a little bit of a roll here, people. So if you need the bathroom, please don't feel badly. Just help yourselves. So it's 2015. I get nominated to be the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, following Rabbi David Saperstein, who had been in the job before me for how many years? Can you guess? If you know your Bible, you know the number.
36.
Well, that's not a biblical thing, but it's a good one. 36 was a good Jewish guess. What's another good biblical guess? 40. I mean, come on, people. 40. I mean, but who does a job for 40 years? Rabbi Saperstein was in the job for 40 years. And in the time from Rabbi Dick Hirsch, for 40 years, David organized our movement into the most important interfaith multiracial coalitions that brought you healthcare access, that brought you marriage equality, that brought you women's rights, the FMLA, like the list goes on and on and on. The Jewish community in America has been part of every important civil rights coalition that have advanced the common good throughout our 4 decades of history. And then I get the job. I go to my office and there is a plaque right across from my desk. It was in this spot that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were drafted. I'm like, oh my God, like, who am I and what am I doing here? And then I get a call from Reverend Doug Tanner, who says, Rabbi, congratulations on the new job. It's the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. We're organizing a huge commemoration on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We do this every year. Congressman John Lewis leads a bipartisan congressional delegation across. It's a big year this year because the 50th, President Obama is going to come. Will you come be part of the delegation? I'm like, yes, yes, sure. So I go, and it's like, I've been in the job for like 30 seconds. Okay, so picture this, okay? So I get to Birmingham, which is where we were the night before. The next morning we get on a bus to Selma, but the night before we were in Birmingham at the huge Ramada Renaissance Birmingham. And there's an opening banquet, like 5,000 people at this thing. And if I could tell you, that room was the luminaries of civil rights history. It was the foot soldiers. It was the clergy. It was every prominent leader you can picture from your history books or for the museums was actually in the room. And it was 10 years ago. So we've unfortunately lost a lot of them who've gone to join our fathers. But and I walked in there, and by the way, almost the entire Congress was there, President Obama and the executive branch. So I had a strategy: sit in the back. No, because nobody knows me. I don't know anybody. I'm new in the job. I'm like, just sit in the back and watch, and it'll be a really good experience for me to kind of learn this thing. So I'm sitting in the back, kind of. I see Jesse Jackson walk by, and I'm like, oh, that's neat. That's it. There's Al Sharpton, and the whole thing, and John Lewis, of blessed memory. And then I hear, excuse me, is Rabbi Pesner here? Rabbi Pesner, are you in the room? And I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm in so much trouble. And it's Reverend Tanner, the guy who called me. I'm like running to the front. I'm sorry, whatever I did. So I get to the front of the room and he goes, oh, Rabbi, I'm glad you're here. Listen, we realized it's Shabbat. You should say a blessing. So I'm like, okay, this is really not fair. I mean, so I'm walking up. I mean, I literally, then I'm like, okay, I'm walking up to the dais, and there again, 5,000 people in a banquet hall, and they all get quiet because there is this like me. And I was like, dig deep, dig deep, dig deep. What do I say? And I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, this moment is not about me. This is not about me. So I took a deep breath and I introduced myself. And I explained that I led the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. I told the story I told you earlier about, the role that we played and the, our, role in the civil rights movement, and that I was honored to be leading the Jewish delegation. And this was Shabbat. And I said, so I'm not standing here alone. I'm standing here in the footsteps of Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner and Rabbi Dick Hirsch. And then I said, so I want to invite all of the Jews who are in the room to come and stand with me. So there wasn't just about me, right? And so they all came up. And by the way, it was a beautiful multiracial array of Jewish people at the front of the room. And, members of Congress came up, Debbie Wasserman Schultz came up, and Elliot Engel came up, and Jan Jakowski. And the senator from Vermont remembered he was a Jew. It was amazing. And it's okay. No, it's okay. Really, it's fine. It's fine. It was Larry David, actually. And they were, I will tell you, I hope there's no politicians in the room, but they of course were like, yes, we're here. Look at us. And it's fun. But they were so proud to be up there and to hear this story. And I said a Shechianu, and we said a Motzi, and I said, I just want to say, because you see, for the Jewish people, we did not start marching 50 years ago. We started marching 5,000 years ago. And we will march for 5,000 more years if that's what it's going to take. Thank you. Well, that's what happened. They applauded me, and it was really nice. It felt really good. So I'm like exhaling, and I'm breathing, and I kind of come off the stage, and I'm just trying to go back to my seat, and this amazing, beautiful, spectacular, coiffed woman grabs my hand and said, "Rabbi," say Rabbi.
Rabbi?
And I said, "Yes, Speaker Pelosi." And I was like, thank God I watched CNN. No, because I'm like, what if I didn't know who she was? So she said, and this is going to come close to home, people, because this story is about you all. She said, looks at me and says, "My granddaughter was Esther on Purim." Now, it's true. Now, this is a while back, but her daughter married a Jewish guy. And at the time, they were living in Arizona and had their kids in a Jewish preschool. And Speaker Pelosi had been visiting one year her grandchild, and it was during Purim. And so she went to temple for Purim and got to take her granddaughter up to do whatever. And then she looked at me, holding my hand, announcing this with pride, and looked at me and said, "Do I count? Do I count?" Now, there's so much Torah in that moment, okay? Like, just think about the Jewish community in America and who we count, who is us, and who wants to be part of us, who sees themselves as part of us, who would be included in part of us if only we would get out of our own way at times. But that's a whole other sermon that I'll give another time. But I thought to myself, how incredible that I am in this space because of the rack founded by a man who saw a sign, "No Jews, no dogs," who experienced the ultimate othering as a Jew, who was in solidarity with Black people who had been ignored and erased. They don't even bother with us. Who was being asked by the most powerful woman in America, at least in politics, "Do I count?" And I thought how far we've come as Jews with power and privilege on the one hand. And what a decade since that moment. That was 2015. By 2015, the Voting Rights Act that we're so proud of, because we believe it was actually the legal guarantor of the multiracial inclusive democracy that we think will keep us all safe, was eviscerated by the Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder. And you've now seen 10 years of voter suppression because of Shelby v. Holder. Everybody say Shelby, Holder. Holder is an Eric Holder, okay? So a bunch of states like Alabama, like Shelby County, like Selma, sued wanting to make changes to their voter laws. And basically the claim was, well, let me not say the claim. What got eviscerated was preclearance, which was the part of the Voting Rights Act that basically said any state with a history of voter suppression can't change their voter laws without clearance from the Department of Justice. And it was a way to hold states accountable that they couldn't do things like, you know, I don't know, close polling places in historic communities of color, or say one polling place per county, right? And all the kinds of ways in which, without at least having the Department of Justice say, well, wait, well, how will that impact historic communities that have been victims of voter suppression? By the way, as a historical footnote, I'm not a lawyer, so all the lawyers in the room, you can correct me. Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, his legal reasoning was this very complex legal theory that I would summarize by saying, things are better now. That was, I mean, right? I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. Of blessed memory, Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously wrote her withering dissent in saying, the logic of the court is a lot like standing in a rainstorm underneath an umbrella and saying, well, gee, I don't need my umbrella anymore because I'm not getting wet. And what happens? The very first racialized voter suppression law that was passed by North Carolina, a law that was so heinous, the appellate court, the federal appellate court, when it came to them, called it racist with surgical precision. Racist with surgical precision. And we've seen state after state after state. You're in Arizona, so you know how much of a fight in real time there is right now. And now it's gotten so bad, the cancer of voter suppression, it isn't just about what shenanigans state legislatures can do. It can be the election denialism. It can be the delegitimization, the attacking. And I want to just say now a shout out to my friends in the back from the Maricopa County Voter Agency or whatever y'all call it here. These are professionals and volunteers who are dedicated to one thing: democracy, voting. They're not partisan. They don't pick sides. They just want to make sure that every voice is heard because every vote is counted. And they're at the front lines of getting attacked. So now we're having to do things, and like the lecture was like, and what can we do? Well, I'll tell you what we can do. I call on all my clergy colleagues, show up as non-anxious presence at the polls. The data show that when folks show up to disrupt and to intimidate voters, when clergy in their robes and in their vestments show up, they can de-escalate and they can bring calm to polling sites. We can do all kinds of things to beat back election denialism, voter suppression by doing nonpartisan 501c3 appropriate voter turnout. By the way, how many of you have done our postcard campaign? Anybody doing our postcard campaign? Okay, I love this. It turns out, God bless Andrea, who runs Reclaim Our Vote. She's a marketing professional. She's the woman who runs this is our partner organization, Reclaim Our Vote. She did she was frustrated by voter suppression. She's a marketing whiz. So she's like, okay, I'm going to study the data. And the data show that opportunity voters, okay, voters who have had a history of not voting but would vote, if they get a personal postcard, handwritten with a real story from a real human, they actually are likely to actually then show up and vote. And so many of you are postcarding right now to communities in Arizona, or frankly, right now in Florida or in North Carolina, where real people are really not sure. Will my vote, I mean, did they shut my polling place? Am I allowed to vote? All of that. Returning citizen, I was formerly incarcerated, all that kind of stuff. That's the real work of democracy in the decade. And I promise, okay, now I got to wind it up. What else? The Dobbs decision. I can't talk about democracy as if it was, voting rights is at the center and the core of democracy because it includes all of the things we care about. But the Dobbs decision was a way of actually rolling back the agency and the rights of real humans. You can see it playing out right now. I will now be nonpartisan, but I will be descriptive. Abortion is on the ballot in Arizona and, by the way, in Florida because of the Dobbs decision, where the Supreme Court, well, I don't have to review the Dobbs decision, but the Dobbs decision also opens the door to a whole litany of other rights, like the whole LGBTQ community, or frankly, multiracial marriages. Justice Thomas was specifically asked, well, wait a second, if you're saying this applies to same gender marriages, why wouldn't interracial marriages? There really now is a fight about ways in which we can all show up in this democracy that were never under discussion before. And I have to invoke, Jews will not replace us. Why did the same tiki torch bearing thugs target a Confederate statue enchanting Jews will not replace us? The Confederate statue was put there to intimidate Black people not to vote. It was part of the Jim Crow era backlash against Reconstruction. And they chant, Jews will not replace us today, because they know Jews are the advocate for the multiracial multiracial interfaith democracy that's inclusive, that would actually be the antidote to the white Christian nationalist vision that some of these folks have. And it's all about the replacement lie. I never call it the replacement theory, which is an attack on democracy. It's this lie that Jews, read Soros, read Jews, are part of this global cabal, a plot, we've heard this movie before, a conspiracy to turn America Black, brown, and Muslim through immigration policy and voting rights. Well, here's the thing. Part of it's true. We're for voting rights, and we're for immigration, and for helping migrants and refugees and strangers. As my grandma Fanny, when she was 16 years old and was rescued from the horrors of the pogroms of Europe in this country, because it could be the multiracial inclusive democracy. So yeah, we're for immigration and we're for voting rights. And so we are a thorn in the side of those who would actually keep America from being a multiracial, inclusive democracy. And there are more guns in this country than people. The number of guns that have been produced and sold in the 10 years that I've been the director of the RAC is what led to the massacres, too many that I can name, but inclusive of them was the massacre of the Tree of Life Synagogue, another assault on democracy. Why? Tree of Life was a highest congregation, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, celebrating Refugee Shabbat, committing themselves as a solidarity congregation. Again, part of the way in which there are some people that want some people not to have the right to vote to keep this country the way they want it to be. That's where we are and what's at stake. Not just in this election, but in this generation. So I'm going to close with some hope. I'm going to paint a picture of what I saw in Pittsburgh. You can be one more story. You from Pittsburgh? You're going to love the story. Well, we need her there right now. You know, a lot happening in Pennsylvania, right? Arizona, Pennsylvania. I love all my battleground states or whatever they are. That Shabbat morning in 2018, my phone blew up. I don't usually check it on Shabbat, but I'm like, something is happening. And I got the message, get in the car. I live in Washington, D.C., get in the car and get to Pittsburgh. And I am in the car and on the phone. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the president of our movement, was in Israel at the time. And I was kind of the ranking Reform Jew. And so I had to go and show up and just show up. And of course, you can imagine how intense and overwhelming and important it was. But I want to paint a picture of Soldiers and Sailors Hall, which was the night after the vigil. Tens of thousands of people. It was convened by the city of Pittsburgh, interfaith, multiracial array. Many more people there not Jewish than Jewish. All the luminaries of the city, the faith community. I had a privilege of a seat in the front because of my role. There were thousands of people that couldn't even get in the building, were outside watching on a Jumbotron. And Wazi Muhammad of the Muslim community got up and said, there were so many speeches and it was so moving, but he said, the Muslim community is here in solidarity with our Jewish family. We will stand guard outside your synagogues to keep you safe. And we've raised enough money to make sure that all of the families who are impacted will have all of their healthcare costs and funeral costs paid for. I will acknowledge, I have to tell this story a little bit differently since October 7th. Wazi and I don't see what happened on October 7th the same way. Our multi-faith coalition is under challenge right now. I acknowledge that. We don't understand the same set of facts of what's happening in Israel and Gaza the same way. And I'm not willing to give up on democracy and the fight for social justice in America because we disagree. And I won't give up my relationship because we disagree. God demands better, I think, from us. But the story gets even better. He was followed by Dr. Vincent Cole, one of the most important Black pastors in Pittsburgh. He got up and said, I want to remind you of three things. Number one, this was an attack on Jews, full stop. And when you attack Jews, you attack all of us. Everybody exhaled, being held and seen in that way. And then he said, the second thing I want to remind you is that just 3 days ago, 2 Black people were shot at a Kroger supermarket because the church that the shooter tried to get into was locked because after Mother Emanuel Church, Black churches now have to be locked when they're in prayer. And then he said, third and finally, let me also remind you, this synagogue was targeted because it was observing Solidarity Shabbat, Refugee Shabbat, when it was standing in solidarity with migrants and refugees and strangers. And he said, we in Pittsburgh are a solidarity city and we stand together. And folks, here's what happened. The people spontaneously started to chant, vote, vote, vote. It was October before the midterms in 2018. Because the folks in that room understood what Goodman and Cheney and Schwerner and Rabbi Dick Hirsch and Dr. King and John Lewis and Shifra and Pua and Miriam Yocheved and Dara Farrell understood. We must stand together in solidarity and hold one another and keep each other safe. But we can't stop there. We got to vote, vote, vote.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have time for some questions. I will come around with one of the mics. Get both working. Oh, we got a second one here. Great. Do we have a question? I'll repeat the question for the Zoom.
Rabbi, thank you, not just for the talk tonight, but for everything that you do for Judaism, for the country, and for the world. I have a question. We are living in a very divided country. We are in a very divided community. I think we're the embodiment of the ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. One of the issues that has captured the attention of the country was an attack on the Haitian refugee community in Springfield, Ohio, that they're capturing and eating the pets. The rabbi of the small synagogue in Springfield went on record in support of the people who made those claims, although he has since walked back those remarks. You went public disagreeing with what he said. In our community, one of our congregational rabbis gave a prayer at a rally for one of the presidential candidates, very large rally in our community. So my question is, what do you see as the appropriate role of a faith leader, of a rabbi, especially of a congregational rabbi, in an election year when there are serious political issues that divide the community?
Thank you for the question. And thank you for my brother to start the standing ovation. You know, there's always somebody in the crowd who's like, going to say, I'm going to stand up for this guy. So
Couldn't see if anybody else.
Nachshon right here, the first one to jump in. Thank you. No, really, it was felt a lot of love it just now. So thank you. And thank you for that question. It's, there's a lot underneath it. First of all, I want to acknowledge it's all public, so you can Google it. My comments, the original comments, I was incredibly uncomfortable with what I did. Sometimes we make a choice. I had a philosophy professor. This feels very hot. Is it okay? Volume-wise, people good? Okay. I had a philosophy professor in college who used to say, choice is not about what you choose. It's about what you choose against. That's what you have to always remember in making a choice. So what I chose against was not publicly shaming a fellow rabbi. I don't think in my career I have ever publicly castigated a colleague. And I did it both because I was hearing that my silence was deafening. This was a person who was representing himself as a Reform rabbi and speaking in some ways for Reform Judaism, or Judaism and Judaism in general. And it felt so racist and bigoted and needed to be corrected. And so I took a risk. I just want to acknowledge the pain in that choice, because this is a human. He too is descendant of the same ancestor and is created by the same God and has since done whatever tshuva he's done. So I honor that. Let me just speak descriptively about what the law allows and what politics allow for a rabbi or a cantor, where's cantor woman, right? Or any clergy person who is leading a congregation. The law allows any citizen to endorse a candidate, to take a partisan position. Nobody can deny that. So there are clergy who say, in my private capacity as fill in the blank of name, I am doing X, Y, and Z. What they cannot do is say, as rabbi, so pay attention, rabbi, as rabbi of Temple Chai, we are endorsing this candidate or this party because you're a 501c3 and you're not allowed. But people get confused and think that rabbis can't endorse. Now, to be clear, I never endorse. My brother-in-law ran for Congress and is still not speaking to me. And I said to him, Perry, it's a great story, New York won in 2018. I said, Perry, if I endorse anyone, then the claim that the RAC is strictly nonpartisan, that we advocate on issues and policies rooted in values, not candidates and not parties, then I won't be able to do that. And by the way, there's disagreement about this. Rabbi Saperstein has endorsed. He and I have a Shammai Hillel debate about it. He says, as long as and Rabbi Schindler, by the way, blessed memory, he endorsed all the time. He would just say, I'm endorsing in my private capacity, not as the head of the Reform movement. You know, Rick Jacobs and I often joke, like, I can't say a word without saying, well, the RAC just said. It's like, well, I'm a human, but anyway. So, Rabbi Emily, you are allowed to endorse if you want to endorse. That doesn't mean she should. So what I say to rabbis all the time is, it is your legal right as a clergy to, in your personal capacity, endorse a policy, a party or an individual. The question is whether you should. And that answer is something you have to answer both about your own ethic, but your politics. So I ask, like, how will it feel if you endorse this candidate when you know there are people in the congregation who are going to vote for the other candidate? How will they still see you as their rabbi? That's your choice. Now, to be very clear, candidates and parties are not issues and policies. If you advocate for yes on 4 to codify abortion rights into law in Arizona, that is not partisan. That is a deeply held position of policy. Rabbi, if you want to, again, your choice, you are absolutely allowed to, on behalf of this institution, as a 501c3, say, we stand for this right of a woman to control her bodily autonomy, if you want. Now, there are congregations where there is not agreement on that. And smart clergy are thoughtful about how to make sure their congregations are Hillel and Shammai. Remember, it's the most beautiful text in the Talmud. When the question is asked, why is Hillel usually the right answer? And the heavenly voice says, because Hillel always quoted Shammai. Meaning we always acknowledge the sacredness of the other. They're both words of the living God, but the preferenced ones were the ones that were lifted up by the majority of the minority. This is why Ruth Bader Ginsburg's work was so sacred, okay? So, long-winded answer to your question. I think it's really, legally, it's a matter for the rabbi to do it in their private personal capacity, but there's also the question of ethics and the role that they have with their congregation and the trust. Let me also just be super duper clear if anybody didn't catch it. On behalf of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, I amplify the voice of 2 million Reform Jews in 900 congregations led by 2,000 rabbis. I don't have the luxury of having my own personal opinion about these things because I have to, and we don't just land on these positions like by making them up. There is a robust policy setting function where resolutions are crafted by the Commission on Social Action, a body politic of 150 representative leaders. They go through a process of study and discussion and discernment. They then make recommendations to the boards of the Union for Reform Judaism, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and all the other agencies of the Reform movement. And then they go to the biennial convention where 5,000 people get to vote after having had discussion and debate in the congregations about those resolutions. So when I say that we are advocating for yes on 4 in Arizona, it's not because that's my personal opinion. I know there may be people in the room who disagree with that. So I honor the dissent, but that is the official position of the Reform movement. And the Reform movement acknowledges the dissent. We're not unanimous, but we've gone through a process to hear every voice and then take a position, which, by the way, we've been doing for 100 years. So it's not like when people say, why is the Reform movement so political? I'm like, read history. Okay.
It's 139 in yours.
Oh my God, it's 4 in Florida. Know your audience. Thank you for clarifying. Now people were going to vote for the wrong thing. Okay. Well, hopefully it'll be self-evident when you read the actual ballot, right? Yeah.
Who else has a question? Yes.
Rabbi, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for encouraging that your family join you. I feel like the Hillel
Shammai
is a noble idea, but I'm
It
frustrated.
is noble, but
I'm frustrated and frankly fearful that it is not the case that both sides of the conversation are honoring the important contribution of the other.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely afraid with the Dobbs decision, with voting rights, with the fact that it all hangs on essentially the Supreme Court. Like, I'm anxious and I don't know what to do.
yeah. So thank you for that and amen. I'm afraid to. I'm raising 4 young adult daughters post Dobbs. So I'm a parent like many people in this room. I worry about our trans kids. I worry about our kids of color. I worry about our women and the right to control their bodies and it's hard to be in a thoughtful disagreement when lives are on the line. Like I use pronouns. I always say I'm Jonah Pesner. I use the he, him series. And I've had people, with good intention come to me and say, Rabbi, you're alienating people. You use the pronouns. That feels political because one side. And I say, yeah, well, I'm just worried about trans kids committing suicide. I'm just being honest. I know too many trans kids who have contemplated suicide because they've been erased by society. So I'm going to preference alienating the thoughtful shammais because there are lives at stake. So that's, I think, the tension over what you're saying. It's like nice to be in, with Hillel and Shammai debating whether the Hanukkah should go from right to left or left to right, or whether the mezuzah should go up or sideways, feels very trivial compared to what's at stake. So first of all, I would just say there are people who disagree with me who see the people who care about the things I care about the same way we other them. In other words, they feel othered by us. I have talked to lots of, I'm trying to say this artfully in a nonpartisan way. I have heard that argument from both sides of the aisle. There are people in the world who represent themselves as kind of, let me be descriptive. In the Reform Jewish movement, the latest polling shows that in this election, it'll probably be 80% one side, 15% the other side, and then 5% just won't vote. So we have a pretty overwhelming. I've heard the people in the 15% say of the people in the 80%, we are othered, we are targeted, we are not safe. I have to hear that and take it seriously. And I think, like, there was a big debate about, well, put that on the side. So in 1995, I survived a bus bombing. It was perpetrated by Hamas, a Hamas suicide bomber. I lost 3 friends, Joan Devaney, Matthew Eisenfeld, and Sarah Duker, who all died in that year on bus bombing. Joan on my bus, and then Matthew and Sarah on a number 18 bus. And I've often thought about the Hamas terrorist who blew himself up and murdered all those people. And over years of prayer and study and contemplation, what I came to is I would never let Hamas steal my humanity. But that doesn't mean I need to have interfaith dialogue with someone who wants to kill me. So I differentiate between people who take a radical or extremist opposing view and will be violent and threaten my family, versus people who actually have deeply held beliefs that are just discordant with mine, but with whom I can have dialogue and try and find a way to see a common future together. I'll also tell you, when Rabbi Saperstein moved on from the position I'm in now and became an ambassador, he was overwhelmingly approved for his position by bipartisan majorities in the Senate, right? The Senate doesn't agree on a whole lot of things ever. And people who voted for him included people like Rubio and Cruz, because David did so much work over his career, working with thoughtful Republicans about things like human trafficking, about which there was agreement, the global AIDS crisis, about which there was agreement, international religious freedom. Unfortunately, that era feels a bit nostalgic right now because it's become so polarized and so violent. But if what I said before about Jews having hope, I refuse to give up on the humanity of the other and the hope that I have the other. So I don't have a great answer for you other than I'm too nervous. I too know what's at stake, and I won't lose my humanity or my hope. I hope you can sleep a little bit better tonight.
I'll take a last question, giving voice to something that I hear in the community often around how is American Jews to voice discomfort or dissent around occasional Israeli policies that the folks disagree with. And I hear one side of the community that says, that's who we are as Jews. We push back when we think something is wrong, or we disagree, or if we don't like the prime minister, or we think hostages should be prioritized over destroying Hamas, whatever it is. And I hear another side saying that this is a democratically elected coalition and by the citizens of Israel, and it's not our place to get involved in that. And we're not putting our kids to die in an army. And any comment of dissent or disagreement is going to be used by the raging anti-Semites, anti-Israel folks to hurt Israel this time. So how do you think about the nuance of disagreement with Israeli policy and our role as American Jews?
So we're very active in the World Zionist Congress, which Herzl imagined as the diaspora democracy of the Jewish people for our return to our land. I just want to acknowledge, like, part of the Zionist project was a diaspora democracy in which every Jew was a citizen of the Jewish state, wherever we lived. And not just in theory, like the World Zionist Congress meets, I sit on it. We debate and we discuss and we argue and we help set policy. And by the way, the policies are real. The World Zionist Congress controls a huge budget and decides whether money will go to support, let's say, non-Orthodox rabbis performing conversions or to buy land in the West Bank. So if there's precedent in Herzl's own imagination that diaspora Jews have a claim on the decisions made about the land, it strikes me that Herzl would be proud when we weigh in on what we think the prime minister, who speaks in the name of the Jewish people for the Jewish state, does and says things that we find abhorrent or racist. I think right now it's just really hard. Israel's at war. It's existential. The hostages are in captivity. And I think we're all walking a fine line. I will say, descriptively, there's a whole generation of young people who I'm hearing from who are asking me, why are we not proclaiming louder and louder our empathy with the innocent civilians of Gaza and the catastrophe that is this coalition government and its racist policies? And weighing what we also hear, and it is partly generational, so I'm just acknowledging that, from those who would say, but Israel is at war and this is the prime minister, and how could we feed into Israel's enemies? I don't have a good answer other than to say, I believe that if we're Zionists and if we care about the Jewish state, we have to take the long view. And just like when we have strong criticisms of the United States government that does not make us un-American or unpatriotic, when we have strong criticisms of the Israeli government, I think it makes us better Jews, better Zionists, and better lovers of Israel.
Thank you, Rabbi Jonah Pesner. So much.
All right, you don't have to get up twice. Once is enough. It's okay.
Friends, just before I say my thank yous, I don't want to forget to tell you that there's chocolate mousse, and there's wine, and there's fruit in the room next door, and there's only about 40 chocolate mousse cups. So if you really want it, you should go. Also, we're selling Rabbi Pesner's book, and he's going to do a book signing if you want to sign this, if you want this book signed. I want to thank our great friends at Temple Chai. I want to thank Alan and Amy Isaacson and Nona Siegel for being with us. I want to thank Carol and Alan Zeichick for your leadership and support. Thank you, Rabbi Pesner. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, our staff and board. Have a beautiful night and Shana Tova. We should have a good year of health and strength and happiness and peace in the world and continue learning together. God bless.